it's not as bad as I thought it was gonna be. Um, that's about the only positive thing I can really say about this. So, for those of you who don't know, the She-Hulk episode that everyone was waiting for finally came out. Episode 8, featuring Daredevil, played by Charlie Cox once again, to perfection, I will just add. And I will say, keep in mind I stopped watching the show after about episode 3. But out of the 4 episodes of this show I have seen, this is by far the best one. That being said, it's still not a great episode. This isn't going to be a review of the entire episode because I could not give a single shit about She-Hulk. The effects suck, the writing sucks, and pretty much everything about the show doesn't work for me. But I do like Daredevil. I like Daredevil a lot. Daredevil, the 3 seasons that are on Netflix, is one of my favourite superhero properties of all time. He is one of my favourite Marvel characters of all time. So let's talk about what this episode did with him that I liked and some stuff that I really didn't like. On the positive side of things, I've already mentioned Charlie Cox once again plays Matt Murdock and Daredevil to perfection. I feel like he is made for that role. And I feel like for the most part, when it came to the writing for him, it wasn't awful. Like, it wasn't to the same standard as it was in his own show. And I get this is kind of a different spin on the same character sort of thing that they're doing. But I did feel like, especially in the scene when he is battling Jen in the courtroom, that the dialogue he was throwing out felt very similar to something he might have said in the Netflix show. So I have to give the writers credit for at least paying enough attention to not completely ruin how he speaks. But on the negative side of things, some of the jokes he was making were not landing. In the Netflix show, he did occasionally wisecrack, but that was a much more serious show. In this one, he's just kind of joking about his ass not being kicked, and then him really liking detective procedural dramas and stuff like that while he's beating up bad guys. Jokes like that just did not work. I did actually genuinely like the chemistry between Matt and Jen in this episode, though. As annoying as I find Jen as a character, I feel like that scene just before they hook up, which... whatever, you know, Matt Murdock sleeps around. That scene where they're talking, discussing various things on the rooftop before that scene happens, I felt like was actually a genuinely decent scene. So I feel like for the most part they handled Daredevil okay, but there are a few elements that I really didn't like as well. For one, I don't like how he's as agile as he is in this, which kind of contradicts me saying that I'm a big Daredevil fan, because in the comics obviously he is more agile. He's able to flip and do all sorts of crazy stuff even though he is only human. And they do display that a little bit in this, but because I'm so attached to the depiction of the character in the Netflix show, seeing him sort of jump off buildings and flip around and stuff like that, it just doesn't seem right. It just, when he was fighting She-Hulk, the CGI, which I know it is difficult to have a character in a suit and a character who is purely CGI fight without it looking kind of tacky and fake, but I'm not a fan of that. I don't know. I prefer the more grounded hallway fight, fist fight kind of, you know, in season 2 of Daredevil where he had the gun taped to one hand, he had the chain in the other, that fight scene, which I think is amazing. I prefer stuff like that. It's more gritty and grounded. That being said, they do tease us with a little bit of a Netflix-like hallway fight. They even play the Daredevil theme song for half a second just so Jen can make fun of the colour of his costume, which, you know, is... the costume looks okay. It's gonna change. They just wanted to put him in a comic accurate costume for this show, I guess. The hallway fight went on for about 20 seconds, but that was probably the best part of the episode. It was filmed relatively well, too. It wasn't a one take or anything as awesome as they would have done in the Netflix show, but it was cut way too short. There was a bunch of other guys that came into the room, and then Jen, or She-Hulk, just falls through the ceiling and crushes them all, just before everyone thought we were about to get a really awesome Daredevil fight scene. It didn't happen, and that was when the episode made me a little bit angry, because I was like, oh my god, they're going to do it. They're actually going to make me kind of like what they're doing with Daredevil, despite the fact that the jokes aren't really landing for me, and despite the fact he's a little bit too agile. They're going to do something that I'm really going to like, and they just completely ruin and fumble the moment. I've seen a few people overreact online about how it completely ruins the Netflix show. I'm not on that side. I was thinking that's how I was going to feel. Long story short, though, I think they could have done a lot worse with what they did with him in this episode. The walk of shame scene near the end of the episode, I think, is absolutely ridiculous, and that is one thing I do genuinely hate. Just him walking around with his shoes off while he's still got the Daredevil costume on in broad daylight after him and Jen hook up, which I think was incredibly stupid. It fits the tone of the show, but it doesn't fit the tone of Daredevil, the Netflix show, or the comic books. So that's really where I stand on it. It's not the most in-depth description of the episode or sort of everything, every intricate detail about what they did with the character. It's a 30-minute episode of a show with a character coming back in a slightly different capacity to what we're used to seeing him as. Different costume, he's a little bit more quippy, which is a more comic accurate, but like I said, I'm used to him being a little bit more brooding than this. I don't think it was the worst thing in the world, so I do kind of appreciate the writers for at least not completely screwing it up. They could still, with the Born Again series and his cameo in Echo, different writers and production team, I get that, but they could still screw this up, and I am still incredibly worried. But for now, when everyone thought this was going to completely ruin him, I personally don't think that it did. So what do you guys think of Daredevil in this episode of She-Hulk? If you hated it, let me know why. If you loved it, let me know why. I'm kind of in the middle, leaning slightly more to the negative, but at the same time, that's probably just because I thought it was going to be the worst take on this character they could have possibly done. But they teased us a little bit with the hallway fight, what could potentially happen. They could potentially bring that back for his own series, so there are glimmers of hope in there, and that's kind of what I'm holding on to at the moment. So I don't think they completely fucked it, but they could do. So let's see where they go with that.